Scott, tell us about this like trilogy of DevSecOps stuff that we're gonna have.
Yeah, so I hadn't been able to find anything that I really liked that applied DevSecOps principles to APIs. And so the AppySec course that we put together, at first I wasn't sure how big it was going to be. I used the Department of Defense framework for their DevSecOps strategy and guidebooks in order to kind of guide where I was taking everything. And it turned out to be pretty massive. So we decided to break it up into three parts. The first part, you're going to see really kind of a microcosm of it today, and then we'll expand upon it. If this is interesting to you, what you see today over a 25-minute kind of lightning blitz, then you can check out the introductory portion of the course, which is about 2 hours on the link that Dan's going to share. And what that really does is it looks at the entire life cycle of code so that you have a full understanding of what DevSecOps, because a lot of organizations think they have DevSecOps, and that just means they slap DevSecOps onto somebody's title. Same problem you have with DevOps. Oh, but you give it to DevOps. DevOps isn't a job title. It's a cultural process. And so what I wanted to do is kind of demystify all that, show folks what are all the pieces of the puzzle that go into DevSecOps. You don't have to do all of it. You do what's right for your organization. And so part two of the course is going to be more of a deep dive into DevSecOps, including demonstrations of different tools that are involved. There's so much content that I won't be able to go really deep into each one, but you'll at least have an understanding of each of the different stages, and you'll see them in one of the slides today. I moved pretty fast, so I'm just barely going to touch on it. And then the third section will be really a deep dive into the API relevant portions, including probably demos of tools like AppySec.ai and other relevant tools in the
Yep.
API space. So
Well, I think we've stalled enough. Let's get you into your talk here. But Scott is someone I've gotten to know over the last 6 months or so. Just tremendously generous, kind person. But the background, the expertise he has in DevSecOps, in API security, really unmatched. I've seen his course, and I learned a ton. I've heard about DevSecOps for years. Never really felt I had like a grasp of it, and now I definitely I'm nowhere near your level, but I now get it, right? And so for if this is an area that you're interested in, definitely plan to take this course. It's really quite fascinating. With that, Scott, let me step aside and let you have the floor.
sounds great. Do I need to click any of the buttons here in order to screen share, or have I already done that part, Dan? I'm guessing nobody sees anything. Maybe I have to hit this button now. Present content.
Yeah, hold on. Where
I've
Scott?
hit screen share.
There we go. That should do it.
Aha, there we go. Okay, so now
Hey, man.
let's see. We've done the introduction. All right, looks like that's working. Okay, I'm going to jump right in. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at war. Cyber breaches are now an active part of armed conflict, if not a leading indicator of physical warfare. In fact, Russia's first attack on Ukraine's power grid occurred in December of 2015. Now, that's a full 7 years before the actual invasion in 2022. China, North Korea, Russia, these are all nation state actors that are actively targeting US government data resources, as well as the political parties on both sides of the aisle. So it doesn't matter if you're conservative or if you're liberal, the nation states are coming for us. But government isn't actually the primary target. According to Mandiant, financial services firms are twice as likely to be targeted as government organizations last year. North Korea funds many of its activities via ransomware and the Bitcoin payments that those generate. Organized crime is part and parcel to Russian government activities, and this includes cybercrime. Chinese hackers, in fact, have been exfiltrating intellectual property from US firms for years. The war, unfortunately, has come to us, and the United States government is not coming to save the day. When it comes to a breach, there is a fundamental disconnect between law enforcement requirements to gather evidence by setting the bait and monitoring activities versus the private sector's need to simply stop the bleeding and get back to revenue generating activities at minimal cost. This is before we even touch upon the complexities of international jurisdiction. I'm sure everybody on this at this conference right now has a VPN that can place them in Japan or Europe or somewhere in Africa at the click of a button. So it's really, really hard to track down these criminals across international lines. So not only is the government not coming to help, they're actually partially responsible for this mess. The NSA's stockpile of zero-day attacks and elite tools was hacked and stolen and sold on the dark web 10 years ago. So if it seems like attacks are on the rise, they are. The bad guys have access to all the same capabilities as the good guys, including AI, and that allows them to provide attacks at scale that has never been seen before. And they only have to succeed once. The good guys have to win every single time. Cybercrime now costs $10 trillion annually, and according to IBM, the average cost of a data breach is now $4.9 million. And that breach brings with it not just costs that are direct from remediation, fines, and consulting fees, but also indirect costs like business impact, lost customers, lost IP, and lost trust. And don't forget the cost of the free identity protection that we're all getting 8 to 10 times a year. I have 2 or 3 of them sitting here on my desk right now. Large firms face a greater financial risk in the aggregate due to the size of their organization, but a smaller firm faces greater risk existentially. Small and medium-sized businesses are hit more often by total volume because there's so many more of them, and they have greater impact directly. In fact, bankruptcy is not off the table. Last year, a $100 million organization went out of business in the UK due to a ransomware attack. And those of us in conferences like this are the ones left holding the bag. Our code, our applications, and our infrastructure are the front lines in a new economic war where every innovation is a weapon that can be used against us. As Dan said, I'm Scott Bly. I'm the Director of Security Technologies for Systems Integration Solutions. We're a professional services firm. It's been around for about 30 years in the staffing sector, providing DevOps and security engineers to very large tech organizations and financial firms. I run the professional services cybersecurity capabilities. We do cloud security, API security, AppSec, and DevSecOps consulting. I was at No Name Security before I joined SIS, where I helped deploy API security solutions into very large organizations. At AWS, before that, for a couple of years, I ran the Enterprise Support Security Improvement Program. I've been a solutions architect in cyber. I've been an IT director, and I ran a cybersecurity and IT consulting firm for about 15 years. So I've done a little bit of everything and a lot of most things. Today, what we're going to talk about is why API security, asymmetric warfare. What am I even talking about here? We're going to follow the money. How do you figure out what's going on and apply attribution to some of these attacks? Kind of demystifying DevOps versus DevSecOps, as we talked about in the preamble. And then I'm going to wrap up with an anecdote about your names in the paper. Something that a lot of people don't want to see, but that's not something to measure anything by. Why API security? We're all here at the AppSec University course. The problem is that API security is a bit of a dumpster fire at the moment. My beautiful AI generated image, hopefully you guys will get a kick out of some of these as we go through the course. There are 150 billion API attacks from January 2023 to December of 2024. That is a pretty mind-blowing number. You've all heard the phrase that data is the new gold. We're seeing it play out in real time right in front of our eyes. DevOps is the process by which organizations are leveraging that rush to exploit the data that we have available. They're wanting to mine it, sell it, partner with other organizations in order to put it out to the world and extract value from it. It's the most valuable substance on the planet right now, outstripping oil. The way that is done is through APIs. APIs provide direct conduits to data, and the DevOps success of being able to get code and features to market to exploit data, transform data, access data over the last 10 years or so has been monumental in terms of creating this explosion in API interconnectivity. As a result of that increase in API landscape and just the sheer number of APIs that are out there. I believe 85% of all internet traffic is APIs now, something like that. It's an insane number. But with that explosion in the use of APIs has come increased vulnerabilities. The security team simply can't keep up with the volume of features and APIs that are being published. And as a result of microservices architectures and serverless architectures, et cetera, APIs are communicating directly with other APIs more and more often. And so you end up with this interconnectivity between organizations such that a breach in one organization can result in a data compromise in another organization. If you're selling something to a company for $100 and somebody changes that in your catalog maliciously so that it's now $1,000, you've just caused a 10x increase in the cost to your partner organization. That's a pretty benign example that can be fixed in accounting, but those kind of things can happen. So you can now have a direct impact on a business partner as a result of an API failure on your side. So that interdependence brings with it additional business risk. The other thing that we hear from customers on a pretty regular basis is, oh, we're not really worried about our internal APIs. They're not accessible from the outside. Apparently, these people have never heard of ransomware. Of course, ransomware comes in typically through a phishing attack, lands on somebody's laptop. That came in through the network firewall. You're now behind the safety of what you consider to be your internal network. And unfortunately, that provides the first point in a land and pivot attack where you have lateral expansion within an environment in order to land that ransomware somewhere that was supposedly internal. APIs suffer from the same risk. You see crypto mining attacks take place in private VPCs on AWS all the time. I've seen it myself. So the solution to this kind of expanding problem is the idea behind shift left. It's hard to do because of the scale of the problem, but it's doable. You want to fix problems in development versus operations because it is exponentially less expensive to do so. If you have code that's running and is providing services to customers, it's hard to change it. It's much easier to do so before it makes its way to production. And then you haven't even exposed the vulnerability to the public. The problem is there's about a 1,200 to 1 ratio of AppSec engineers to developers. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. 1,200 developers to AppSec engineers. The AppSec engineers simply have trouble keeping up with the volume of security vulnerabilities that need to be remediated. So you need to find ways in order to empower your developers. That's why many times this is referred to as developer-led testing, etc. I'll show you a little bit more about that later. But like everything else in life, it's a process and technology as well as the people. We end up getting too tied up because we're tech heads in just looking at the technology, just looking at the tooling, and that's an incomplete way to look at it. So we'll touch on that just a little bit. The course is going to go into a lot more detail. The thing of it is with a problem that's this large, it can seem like it's overwhelming, but don't think that you need to try to boil the ocean all at once. This should be an iterative lift, not a burden. When you take on these security transformations, do it one sprint at a time, just like everything else that you're putting into code and into motion. So take it one small bite at a time, the same way you eat an elephant. Now, what do I mean by asymmetric warfare? I'm sure it predates the American Revolution, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start there. So the American Revolution, you have the scrappy American militias trying to figure out how are they going to take down the British that are coming with their cannons and their armies and their giant lines of redcoats that are lined up with their guns. The Americans couldn't possibly win in that capacity. So what they did is they went off and they hid in the bushes off to the side of the road when the British would come marching down, and they would attack from the sides. They used their advantage of understanding the landscape better than the enemy because they couldn't possibly fight them directly head on with the kind of the line warfare that the British had as their overwhelming advantage. What you see in the slide in front of you is from Desert Storm. Those are tanks lined up in the desert as far as the eye can see. As we saw from the shock and awe campaign from January to February of 1991, a standard military force couldn't possibly stand up to American force rolling at you through the desert. So that war was over and done with very, very quickly. Everybody learned a lesson from that, which is you don't want to take on the Americans in a fair fight. So as a result, you have things like Afghanistan, where there's cave warfare. We don't know how to fight in caves. So what happened is the enemy used our inability to fight in a certain capacity against us. So that cave warfare went on for 20 years. You have the same thing in Iraq, IEDs and insurgency that lasted until 2011. North Korea is now doing the same thing. You have tech workers that are infiltrating, and we'll talk about a very specific example of that today that was kind of shockingly successful. What they're doing is fighting in a way that they can't win if they want to just come like fight in an open warfare situation like what we see in the slide. You have to do something different. Everybody thought Russia was going to be able to invade Ukraine and just obliterate them with the size of their force. But because Ukraine didn't fight in the same way, because they've been nimble and because they've been fighting in an asymmetric capacity, they've been able to hold out much, much longer than was initially assumed. And part of that has been through the collaboration with organizations like Anonymous and other hacktivists. So speaking of Russia and the invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing this play out. Cyber attacks are now an actual part of physical warfare, not just a precursor. So the cyber attack started in 2014. We have the first attack on the power grid in 2015, 2016, and 2017. You have Petya and WannaCry ransomware attacks. NotPetya came along in 2017. Now, what's interesting about NotPetya, it was the most destructive cyber attack ever, but it wasn't actually ransomware. It was actually a wiper. So it was just there to destroy data, not to be held for ransom or for financial gain. It was just there to cause damage, and it was an eternal blue Windows-based attack that was an offshoot of some of the NSA materials that I talked about before that were released in 2014. Once you get to the actual invasion, 1 hour before the invasion, Russia took down the Kiev Post and KA-SAT. Those are communications networks. And so on February 24th, 2022, when the invasion took place, you had communications that went down. That's cyber warfare directly involved with physical warfare. December 2023, the Kiev Star mobile network was taken down. And December 2024, there was a huge cyber attack on Ukrainian government services. But Ukraine hasn't just taken this lying down. Right off the bat, they allied with other crowdsourced resistance. They have an IT army that is global in nature. And in fact, Anonymous declared war on Russia on March 1st, 2022. So that's just about a week after the invasion. So as a result of this kind of collaborative effort, you have a tremendous number of wipers that have been deployed against Russia. In fact, the Russian government was hit by a huge one in June of 2024. So we're seeing this kind of discrepancy in the size of a physical fighting army being offset by the capabilities in the cyber arena. Now, when you're looking at these kind of attacks, you got to follow the money, just like you do in any other kind of investigation. So if we look at the U.S. Treasury breach, for example, this was in December of 2024. Beyond Trust had an API key compromise that came about. And as a result of that API key being compromised, the malicious actor was able to access U.S. Treasury Department, apparently non-classified data sources. And that was attributed to a Chinese, either government or Chinese-backed actor. So these are nation states being involved. Cloudflare was breached on Thanksgiving of 2023. It actually came in as a result of a previous Okta support breach. Okta used a support system where their support engineers would have end users upload HAR files, those are HTTP archive files, so that they could help identify problems with the Okta service and troubleshoot and figure out what was going on. The problem was one of the support engineers' machines, or probably multiple of them, were compromised, and those HAR files were then able to be read, and the credentials that were frequently embedded within the HAR files as a result of the transactions that were taking place in the web transactions were able to be stolen. And Cloudflare's credentials were in one of those hard files. As a result of gaining access to those credentials, the Cloudflare network was then compromised, and you have that same lateral movement where they were then able to explore the Cloudflare network and do a lot of malicious activity. Now, that was attributed to a nation state, but it's not clear which one at this point. In November of 2022, T-Mobile had, unfortunately, their fifth breach since 2018. This was a direct API exfiltration attack of 37 million customer records. This was attributed to a cyber criminal. So these sorts of attacks where the data is being pulled are all very, very much API relevant, and we can watch what happens to the money. So this is a sample listing of a dark web data resource being sold. I pulled this up from ChatGPT. It's pretty accurate, and I'll show you why on the next slide. But what this is it's an amalgam actually of a couple of different T-Mobile breaches, because the 2022 breach did not have any social security numbers in it. But as you can see, the example that ChatGPT put together does have the social security numbers in it. Social security number data was leaked in a previous T-Mobile breach before the 2022. So this is kind of a roll up of both. But these are what these listings actually look like. It's kind of like an Amazon or an eBay listing. Hey, data sale. We've got fresh T-Mobile, hot data, verified, fire emojis, social security number, date of birth, Black Venom, 5-star reputation, has 136 different posts. Here's a data sample with actual JSON structure, so you can know how you'd be able to use that data in your nefarious plans. Details of what kind of data is there. What's the price? What payment is allowed? Oh, if you're a known buyer, you can get 10% off. Act now, right? Moderators vouching for the quality of the data. Hey, this is some fire social security number data. So you've got an active marketplace that's taking place on the dark web. And if you don't believe me, here's an actual screen grab from it's an older site. It's from 2017, but this is an actual screen grab from a dark website selling data exactly like what I described. This particular screen grab is of actual W-2s of people from all over the country. Their data is being sold for $16 a piece. Just click add to cart, and you've got somebody's W-2. So it's pretty shocking, but this is the world we live in now, and this is what's happening. So when your data is stolen and it's exfiltrated from an API, it ends up on the dark web and is used to fund these activities. It's literally being sold. If we look at the most prevalent example, Bybit was hit. That's a cryptocurrency exchange for $1.5 billion. This was in February of 2025. So this is this year, just a couple of months back. The largest crypto heist in history. It was attributed to the North Korean Lazarus Group. As a result of this attack, North Korea is now the third largest Bitcoin holder in the world behind the US and the UK. We're going to play this attack backwards. So how did they do it? They managed to get $1.5 billion intercepted in a multi-signature wallet transaction where they had managed to replace the appropriate recipient for the wallet with their own recipient wallet. So as a result, the $1.5 billion flowed out of the original wallet into their wallet instead of the right one. How did they do this? They did it by manipulating the JavaScript that was present in an S3 bucket that was owned by the company that handled the multi-signature wallet, which is called SafeWallet. How did they do that? So what happened was the JavaScript was manipulated on one day. A couple days later, the transaction comes through. And then immediately after the transaction, they replaced the code again so that there was no apparent change to the code. So you go look at the code, oh, nothing to see here. But because they could play back the transaction and see when that S3 bucket had been updated, this is why it's important to have your transaction history active, they were able to see that the S3 bucket contents had been changed twice. So they were able to then see who made that change, trace the API key back that was used in order to make the S3 bucket change. And as a result, you could see, that was triggered by this one particular developer. So they go follow the forensics trail back, and they're able to go to that particular developer, and they could see that the developer who worked for SafeWallet, their machine had been compromised. The compromise enabled the malicious actor to pull the S3 key out of that machine that the developer was using in order to make the transaction change so that they could execute that. Now, how did they gain access to that developer's laptop in the first place, you ask? Well, here's where it all comes back to LinkedIn. It turns out that developer was subject to an operation called Operation 99 that was discovered in January of 2025. And this is a global operation primarily targeting the United States, wherein you have all of the North Korean fake recruiters that are out trying to hire people. So you hear about all of the fake job scams and all this other stuff. Turns out it's all a long play to be able to execute attacks just like this. So be very, very careful on LinkedIn, because what's happening is, just like any good sales funnel, you've got your marketing that feeds into sales, that then feeds into actual good qualified leads that leads to an actual sale, or in this case, a successful attack. And this one paid off big, $1.5 billion. So every individual that they're able to interact with on LinkedIn that goes far enough down the line that they interact in a way that they can land malicious payloads on your laptop, if you're a developer, that means at some point you just might work somewhere that's interesting enough that they're going to activate that malware in order to identify the right information that's going to allow them to pull off a heist like this. So our API keys and API capabilities are incredibly important. And as you can see from this trail, we can follow the money. But what does this mean for you? Why do we care? Well, we've got to do something about it. So in API security, there are 4 fundamental pillars. Discovery. This is the concept of if you can't see it, you can't protect it. Dan, do me a favor. Keep me posted on my timing, because we got started at a little bit strange. My timer isn't on, so I'm not sure how I'm doing on time.
Yeah, you got another 5-6 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So discovery, if you can't see it, you can't protect it. That's one of the standard adages in cybersecurity. It's true for APIs as well. It's inventory management, it's change management. It is how are you authenticated, etc. Posture management, think in vulnerability management, infrastructure management. Runtime protection is about what has already happened. Did a bad guy do a bad thing at a particular time, and did you see it? And active testing, this is the concept of security shift left, much like AppSec's API security testing tool. Now, the DoD model looks at a DevOps software factory. I've talked about DevOps, where you have code that gets written, published to an IDE, promotes through your various environments, and is able to get your code out to market. This is great because it's very reproducible and it's very predictable. The problem is it's very fast. So what they do is, in order to offset that increase in vulnerabilities, is they say, oh, great, we're going to add DevSecOps. And so we're going to add security testing at each stage in our CI/CD pipeline. This is good, but it's not enough. Just because you've added SAST, static application security testing, DAST, dynamic application security testing, and penetration testing to your CI/CD pipelines doesn't necessarily mean that you have accomplished what is truly DevSecOps. I go into a lot of detail in the course about DevOps versus DevSecOps and what these things really mean. But according to the Department of Defense framework, DevSecOps encompasses the full life cycle of code, from planning through development, building, test, release, deliver, deployment, operations, monitoring, and feedback. There are 15 different discrete security steps along this way. You don't have to do all of these things in order to improve the security posture of your organization. You need to do what's right for your organization and be able to measure it in an appropriate way. This is the concept behind the marketing term shift everywhere. People got tired of hearing shift left, so come up with something new. But this is what they're talking about. DevSecOps is a continual life cycle, security running constantly and shifted everywhere. The problem with that model that I showed you just a moment ago here, where it's just in the pipeline, is that's DevSec. It's not OPSEC. So when you talk about OPSEC in the context of DevSecOps, what the DoD says is even your development security capabilities and the output from those tests needs to be fed into your operational SIM and SOAR tools so that you have operational visibility of what's happening in development. And that's an area where a lot of customers don't get it right. Excuse me. API security is relevant at a few places. DAST at the testing phase. That's the security shift left part. Security scanning. This is your vulnerability management, posture management in the API security world. Security monitoring is that runtime protection. This is where you really have a heavy reliance upon the technology that's going to accomplish that for you. So that's easy. You just pick a tool, right? Well, here is the security tooling that's specific for APIs. This is so overwhelming, no one can possibly absorb it all. Even an organization like ours, where we're explicitly focused on just identifying the best security tools for particular reasons, this is overwhelming. If you need help trying to sort your way through this, please reach out. But it's just too much. But that's not all. You also have to have processes for APIs that's relevant at the planning stage with threat modeling, penetration testing, security configuration, patching, security audit, and then all the way back around to security analysis. These are capabilities that are API relevant, that are process dependent, not technology dependent, even though technology is involved. And last but not least, I mentioned that it's technology, processes, and people. The people is the most important part because we're the ones doing the work. The problem with a lot of organizations is their dev, sec, and op teams are completely siloed and have very little to do with one another. Part of the idea behind DevSecOps is bringing those teams together so they're working more closely together and breaking down the silos. How do you do that? Amazon has a very famous concept called the two pizza team. Each team is responsible for its own work product and has to be small enough that it can be fed in a meeting by two pizzas. So your team stays small. You're responsible for your own product. That's the development of the code. That's the delivery of the code, the security of the code, and the operations. That team needs to be small. That's a microservices architecture played out in business form. It has its own strengths and weaknesses, but it certainly accomplishes the goal of getting your DevSec and Ops teams to work together. If that's too much of a leap for your team to be able to make at your organization, then consider a DevSecOps Center of Excellence where you're able to share best practices and technical trainings, things like that. Consider something like a strike team, which is a service that we provide. We parachute in developers that have security chops in order to work alongside your developers to solve the problems that they either can't or don't have time to fix. Resourcing. Think about a 70-20-10 split. 70% of a resource's time should be spent on their day job. 20% should be spent on the job. That is about working on the business rather than in the business. So if you're a developer, you're going to be, instead of writing code that's features that's supposed to get out to market, 20% of your time should be spent working on how do I improve the way that we write code? How do I improve the tool sets that we use? 10% of your time should be spent on professional development. So this is not a call that you can make as an individual. This is something your management needs to approve, but please advocate for this because this is how organizations are able to accelerate their ability to innovate, is by paying for professional development, and that's improving your skill set. Gamification, social events, get your people together, get the dev, sec, and ops teams together, go out for pizza and beers, and most importantly, cross-incentivize. This is a C-suite problem, unfortunately, but getting the teams to work together and paying them to do so. Dev teams are paid to get code to market fast. Security teams are there to manage risk, and ops teams are there to make sure that your application is running reliably and stably. But those three objectives are kind of at cross purposes. So identifying ways to cross incentivize your teams is critical. Now, remember all the things we talked about, but I want to end with one quick anecdote. I was talking to a CIO, and he said, if you had to choose one metric by which you would measure the progress of your security program and that demonstrated that we're secure, what would it be? And I thought about it. And I said, well, first, I hate the question because that's got to be impossible. But if I had to choose one, I think I would choose mean time to remediation for critical vulnerabilities, because that at least tells you there's a method to my madness, right? He said, that's really interesting. I'm surprised you didn't say keeping my name out of the papers. And I said, well, sir, that's not a metric. That's just luck. If North Korea is coming after you, you've got a big problem, as we saw with Sony. So metrics are important, but real metrics are actually more important. Something that you can actually measure and improve upon, something that shows that you're progressing and improving the quality of your security posture. You want to identify metrics that work for your organization. You want to measure them and you want to improve them. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So remember the stakes we talked about before. Nation states are coming for you. I want to thank everybody for your time. AppySec University for putting this on. The course is going to be live. If not today, then tomorrow. Dan, I think you said maybe it's ready to go here pretty quick. I appreciate your time. The QR code here leads to a link. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email. As we have seen, LinkedIn is rife with fake actors. So if you reach out to me, I don't accept uninvited folks. So please, if you reach out, I want to hear from you, but send me a message as well and reference this talk. Can't wait to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time. Dan, thank you a lot.
Oh no, it's a pleasure. Man, you covered a lot there, and I think it's really testament to what people should be looking out for in your course. We'll have it out. I don't even know if it'll be tomorrow, but it'll be real soon.
Great.
The content is just outstanding, and if this seemed like a blur, it's Scott covers it very, very methodically and carefully, and you'll get this and much more in the course itself. But I did want to ask you one thing before
Yeah.
we move over to Jesse and Evan. You talk about those breaches and those attacks. The one thing somebody mentioned, I was thinking about it too. It's Stuxnet. Remember Stuxnet? And
Yeah. That was the Iranian centrifuges.
yeah, right. That was
Right.
a cyber attack, was it not?
It absolutely was. In fact, it was from a USB thumb drive, just like one of these. It was actually left in a parking lot at the Iranian centrifuge headquarters. And they did it enough times that eventually somebody picked it up and actually plugged it in on their machine. And as a
Ugh.
result, it was inside the network. So that whole idea of air gap, somebody's going to get around that. There's a reason why USB drives and USB ports are inactivated on machines. I've had to do it in order to pass Disney and Marvel security audits for content security here in Hollywood.
Yeah,
You've got
yeah.
a
It's
lot of
nice.
things that
But
can go
there
wrong. Yeah.
they figured out what type of equipment the
Yep.
centrifuges were, and
Yep.
they built their own malware, or they found
Yep.
a vulnerability and created their own malware.
Specifically, what they did is they got the centrifuges to spin up too fast, but not
Yeah.
too fast all at once, a little bit too fast, a little bit too fast, a little bit too fast over time, so that they killed the centrifuges over a long period of time that was very difficult for them to even figure out what had happened. It didn't
Yeah, and
look.
even the monitoring tools just thought it was just like slightly
Yeah.
out of range, but
Like,
nothing
why is
crazy.
everything going a little weird? Yeah,
Yeah,
it
amazing.
quite a brilliant attack.
Well, thank you, Scott, and everyone. Look out for his upcoming course. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks a lot.
All right.